Right now on the Boardwalk kind of hotline, Kevin McCormick joins me, 97.3 ESPN.com, Sixers writer. Kevin, Brett Brown gets fired. Your first reaction is?
Bittersweet. I mean, it's definitely a long time coming for moving on from a coach, but after seeing him here so long and everything that he's endured, it's going to be a little sad to see him go.
I feel like a lot of this was, we all knew it was coming, but when it finally happened and you're seeing all the statements, Brett Brown, Josh Harris, the owner, Elton Brand, the Sixers release, it almost felt like, Mike Gill mentioned this earlier, it almost feels like it's almost like there's like a release that happened in the world. And now that Brett Brown is gone, Kevin, now what though? Because now the next step is, everyone's been calling for this guy to be gotten rid of, but what do the Sixers do now?
You bring in a head coach with a plan that is ready to do what he can to maximize the prime of Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons.
But how do you do that? How does a coach do that, considering the fact that we haven't seen either one of those guys get any, I don't want to say anywhere, but pretty close to nowhere near what a lot of people's expectations are for those guys. I think people look at Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid as top 5 picks, and they should play like some of the other great stars in the game right now.
Yeah, and the issues are going to come more from just coaching as well. Obviously, you're going to need a coach who is able to, one thing I would say you need more of is someone who's able to adapt on the fly. We saw a lot in this Boston series that just Brad Stevens was just able to move them chess pieces a little better than Brett Brown, and sometimes Brett Brown kind of got lost in his ways of what he'd like to do and how long it took him to adjust. But to be honest, the issues run deeper than the coaching. Like I said, if you want to maximize the primes of Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, you need to go out and get perimeter shooting. I mean, we saw in those last 2 games against the Celtics that the Sixers shot under 30% from 3 with 2 guys whose games are focused around the rim. Having a lack of perimeter shooting around them isn't going to get you the best version of not only the 2 of them, but the best version of what kind of team they can carry as a whole.
So to me, it sounds like part of what you're hitting on is this is not just a coaching issue. This is also a front office issue. And according to reports, Adrian Wojnarowski is reporting that the Sixers are potentially going to maybe do some recalibrations in the front office. So what could a recalibration in the front office be? Obviously, they're keeping Elton Brand as the GM, but is part of the recalibration of the front office also to ensure that whoever the next head coach is, that the talent, as you mentioned on the court, better complements Embiid and Simmons?
Yeah, that needs to be crucial, of just bringing in a group of guys who have a concise plan and a long-term plan. What we've seen, just re-rolling of the dice every 3 to 4 months, and that isn't going to win you an NBA championship. You need to bring a group in here who is focused, that has a long-term plan, that is prepared to succeed moving in the long term.
If you were involved in the 76ers, what do you think the number one part of that long-term plan should be? Like, what is item number 1 on your board in the boardroom having the conversation?
It has to be getting out from under that Al Horford contract. If you look at this whole season as a whole, one common theme is just the Al Horford experiment did not work. Teams are not going big anymore. Wings and guards run this league. So you need to get out from under that contract and be able to allocate that money towards guys who can shoot the ball from deep, create their own offense, and more kind of catch up to the speed of today's game.
Kevin McCormick joining me on the Boardwalk kind of hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Top of the show on game night. Brett Brown officially fired a little more than an hour ago. Follow Kevin McCormick on Twitter at KevinMCC973 for your Sixers coverage and at 97.3 ESPN.com. Kevin, one of the names that's been mentioned already by Woj in his reporting is Ty Lue. Do you feel that's a good idea, a bad idea? What is your perspective on that, considering that if you ask a majority of Sixers Twitter, they throw out names like Mark Jackson, you hear the Van Gundy's names, you hear a lot of retreads Ty Lue is kind of a retread. He's not a totally new guy. He's only had one coaching job so far in the league, but he's been Doc Rivers' assistant for the last couple of years.
I actually like the idea of Ty Lue for the sheer fact of you're bringing in a guy that understands what it takes to win an NBA championship. Granted, he had LeBron James on his roster, but he was still in that experience of just a deep playoff run and is focused. And I know Mark Jackson's name's been thrown around a lot. I saw Gil tweet about it earlier. And one thing I'm against Mark Jackson for is if you look at his situation in Golden State, when the Warriors were getting ready to turn that corner and really start to contend for titles with their core, one thing they adjusted was getting rid of Mark Jackson. So if you look at what they became after they moved on from Mark Jackson, it'd be very hard to convince me to say that, hey, this is the guy that we want to bring in to win titles. But in terms of Ty Lue, I like the idea. He is given more of a hard coach, which could benefit these players a little more and give them kind of a taste of something new. And he just has that success. Granted, he's not a long-tenured coach, but in his short time coach, he saw deep success.
Now, obviously, part of the Sixers moving forward also has to do with the players who are currently on the team. And I think a lot of people are wondering, even if you bring a new coach in here, how much is he going to change the team itself? So how much of whatever happens next has to do with Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, not just taking the next step, but showing a willingness to buy into what the next coach is putting out there?
It's all going to come down to a coach implementing something that I feel will make them want to show up. I mean, you want to have, like Josh Richardson said yesterday, that there has been a lack of accountability all year. So you want a coach to come in and say, hey, I have this plan. I know it's going to work. Everyone has their roles, and really just get everyone to buy into what needs to be done, but also be able to not go at guys, but be able to address when guys are not doing their job properly and what needs to be changed.
That accountability, though, how much of that is on the head coach? How much is that on the players themselves to hold each other accountable?
I think it's a mix. I think it starts at the top with the head coach just because the head coach sets the tone in the locker room. So if you have kind of an easygoing coach or that wants to slack off on your players, it could lead to players then wanting to kind of slack off on themselves in terms of accountability. So basically, you want a head coach that comes in and kind of sets the tone from an accountability standpoint so that it kind of trickles down onto your players.
Now, you mentioned Al Horford a little bit earlier. I'll hit on that with you before we get too far along here. The Al Horford contract is obviously the albatross in the room. You know, in your mind, what would an Al Horford deal actually get the Sixers? Because a lot of times when you're unloading an albatross contract, you might not be getting the best return back in.
Yeah, it's going to be tough to get something of serious value in return for Al Horford, but basically you have to try and go and find a bad contract that fits your team and one that arguably might end a little sooner so that you still kind of have that long-term cap flexibility once you're out of said bad deal.
Cap flexibility seems like a thing we're not going to have for a while, even if you totally move on from the Horford contract. So we know that, if you go by the people who, do the numbers research, they say the Sixers are not going to have a lot of cap flexibility, whether they have Horford or not on the contract. So how much can the Sixers really make changes offseason with a mid-level exception, a couple other side $1 million exceptions, and consider the fact that Alec Burks is going to be a free agent, and consider the fact that if Embiid and Simmons are named All-NBA teams, that also changes their numbers on the salary cap.
Yeah, they're going to have to become those teams like the Warriors who are high spenders but are able to kind of find cheap hidden gems who are able to contribute higher than what they're paid for. One thing that the Sixers have benefiting them right now is Shake Milton is that kind of guy. So it's going to be very tough to find those kind of guys, but being able to kind of find those diamonds in the rough, I guess, of hitting on guys who are able to come in, play a role, and not eat into a chunk of your cap space.
Is there a guy that you see out there, considering how weak of a free agent class there is? I don't think you're going to get a per se guy for free agency, but are there players out there that maybe fit that mold that you're talking about?
I'd have to do a deep dive of this free agent class. I haven't looked too much into it yet, but you see them out there, and it might also have to come from the NBA draft. I mean, the Sixers have a lot of picks in this draft. Granted, a lot of them are in the second round, but if you can go and find guys in the draft who will be able to kind of be insert guys here and just do a certain type of thing, whether it be perimeter shooting, whether it be defense, just having those guys to be able to come in on cheap contracts and be able to mold them into your system and kind of maximize your weaknesses would be key for a team that doesn't have much flexibility in terms of money.
He's Kevin McCormick. Follow him on Twitter at KevinMC973. Check out his work at 973ESPN.com. And as all guests, he appeared on Game Night via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Kevin, I appreciate the time right off top of the show, and I'm sure we'll be talking more as this whole situation continues to ebb and flow.
No problem, Josh. Thanks for having me on.